We have recognized the fiscal issue as the main challenge in the Dominican Republic at this point. And so it's good to hear from you the Fiscal Responsibility Act in New Zealand and your experience presiding the Committee on Reduction of Public Expenditures. Can you give us more of that in this session?
Certainly. Let me just start by saying that I think that the first thing that you need to do is that you need to be able to identify clearly exactly what are the results that you're seeking. The second thing is, over the years, I've come to believe that incentives are much more effective at changing behaviour than command and control. So the solutions aren't really more regulations. The solutions are about changing the incentive. What New Zealand's Fiscal Responsibility Act does is that it changes the incentives on the elected politician. Because one of the requirements of the law is that if the government is going to go into deficit, before that happens, it has to go to the legislature and ask permission to run a deficit. That's somewhat embarrassing for a start. The conditions of asking for that permission is that you must identify what has caused the deficit to occur. You must identify for how long that deficit is going to occur. You must identify how you are going to fund it, and you must identify how you are going to pay for it, and finally you must say how long it's going to take to restore the country to the debt position it was before that deficit occurred. Since that law went in place, no New Zealand government had been prepared to go and ask to run a deficit. Prior to that, every single government had run a deficit for the last 23 years. That changed in 2009 as a result of the recession, and New Zealand will be out of deficits again either this financial year or next financial year.
What about your experience presiding the Committee on Reduction of Public Expenditures? Because there are a lot of sectors, representatives from different sectors in the Dominican Republic who are asking for reduction in public expenditures as society as a whole sees government spending more and more every year, and that spending doesn't really translate in better public services. How did you manage, and how did you do that in New Zealand?
Some of the answers to that question were in my main presentation. The idea that you actually go to purchase contracts means that you more closely identify exactly what it is that you're trying to buy. So it wouldn't be more spending on reading. It would be more children that can now read at their biological age. It wouldn't be more spending on mathematics. It would be more children who are now able to do calculus at this level. So that, for a start, is a help. And the second thing is getting rid of those activities where you are duplicating efforts in other areas but not getting good results. That's exactly what happened with the employment programs that I identified, where we eliminated 30 of them. So being able to focus on that, my experience around the world is that you can maintain the same public benefit, for example, of children who can read or of people being moved back into the workforce, but you can do it with about 1/4 or 1/5 of the money. If you focus on these are the most efficient tools that we have. There's that. The other thing is that when departments or people came to the government to ask for spending, one of the first things that we required from them was that you have to produce evidence of the results of previous spending on this activity. If you can't produce that evidence, you get nothing. So we reversed the burden of proof. It went back on the service provider, and they had to show us that there was value for money. In many instances, that meant that they didn't even come back again because they realized that was just no show. So some of those simple approaches are very effective.
There's a question from the public. What were the public reaction on all these reforms and the political outcome of these reforms in New Zealand?
My response to that question is that one of the things that we frequently fail to do in the political arena is that we fail to adequately sell the problem. You have to convince the public of how serious the problem was. We were able to convince the public of New Zealand that we were on the verge of bankruptcy, that we were not going to be able to honour our bills. So we had a very serious consequence. And against that, we were putting some of these changes help to alleviate that by X, Y, or Z. So relating them to the problem, I think, is the key to getting public acceptance. The second thing is that you shouldn't make decisions based upon what polling or public opinion tells you. Government is about leading, and if something needs to be done, then do it. Because public support often trails the action rather than preceding it. If you wait for everybody to be on side and start to say to you, please cut my program, it's not going to happen. When you cut it and you replace it with something else and people say, hey, this works better, you will get some credit for it. So not having public opinion on your side is not an excuse for not doing anything.
And another question, are those reforms still in place? Is New Zealand still in that path?
The period of reform was really 1985 until about 1993, so about 8 years. During the 19 years since then, there has been some erosion of those problems, of those programs and those approaches, but there's also been some improvement. So government is never static. It's never going to stay in exactly the same place. And from time to time you make major changes and then it will be eroded and you have to go back and do it a second time before you lock it in place. Don't be afraid of going back and doing it a second time. So yes, there's been some erosion of some things, but the major things that I see as a success are that regardless of what political party was governing, we maintained surpluses. And regardless of what political party was governing, we used those surpluses to pay down debt rather than to expand government activity. Those, I think, were really good. And then some of the other major reforms, the way in which we operate the civil service, has remained very much in place. People like that. It's clearer. They think that it's more honest and it's not so fraught with political opportunism.
And the last question is regarding about idiosyncrasia, like how people think in the country and the skepticism that is present in the Dominican society regarding their political leaders and because of previous experiences, society as a whole is skeptic about these reforms, and if we can really do it, there's a doubt if these things can really be done in this country because of previous experiences, how people think, and because this skepticism present.
My response to that is that a healthy society is a society that's skeptical of the things that leaders want to do with their money. Because it's not the leader's money, it's yours. And a healthy skepticism about whether or not this is a good idea, I think is part of the process of continually keeping your leadership on its toes to see that it uses your money wisely and on highest priorities. So skepticism isn't bad. Skepticism should also, though, not stop the progress that's necessary. A leader is somebody who actually does things, not waiting until they're pressured into doing something. Leaders are people who have a vision and are skilled at articulating that vision and then doing the things that take them forward. In most cases, the leaders of the day find that the population is skeptical of what they're trying to do. Recently I read a book about Christopher Columbus. He was certainly a leader. He certainly had a lot of skeptics in Spain. It took him a long time to get back for his vision, but look what his vision produced. So he was prepared to push forward with that. One of my favorite leaders and politicians of all time is Sir Winston Churchill. When Sir Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of Britain, and in his acceptance speech in 1940, he said to the British people, "All I can promise you is blood, sweat and tears, but we will prevail." Now, I can't think of any leaders that I know today who'd be prepared to say that, but it probably would be a good thing if you were saying to your people, there is a lot of hardship ahead, but we're going to fix this and we're going to fix it permanently.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the pleasure.